Some of you may recall the first week of March that Jacob was supposed to come and speak with us, and that his flight was had some mechanical problems. They turned his plane around, and I ended up having to stand in for him. But he was so sad, and we immediately scheduled him, and he's here today. So I think you're really in for a treat. Wow. Okay. If you didn't hear all that, it doesn't matter. Jacob is a healer. He's a teacher. He's also a New York State licensed master social worker, and he does a lot of good to the world. He helps with substance abuse patients in New York, and he runs a number of mindfulness clinics, and you're really in for a treat. So welcome, Jacob Cooper.
Good morning, everyone listening and everyone watching, wherever you are in the world. Hello to you as well. It is a pleasure to be here the second go around. I kind of joked the first time. I think I almost had another near-death experience on that plane when I found out I was about to turn around. But, I'm here. I'm still here. I'm here today. And what a lovely group of souls. This is something foreign to me. I've never been to a place like this. I've had spiritual transformative experiences where I experienced this feeling of oneness that I experience here today, but to go here without the needing to work and hours of meditation to have some of those experiences and just to have it right in front of you is everything that I believe I and so many others try to work very diligently hard to do. But I come here today after speaking, with the Virginia Beach Ions group yesterday at the Edgar Cayce Center. I ran a workshop yesterday afternoon, and I shared my own near-death experience and lessons from the light. And so for those of you who are joining me again, I say hello and thank you for coming back here. And hopefully you gained something different this time around. But I had a childhood near-death experience at the age of 3. That I talk about throughout the world, and I'm currently running my book called Life After Breath, and I'm just about to send my literary proposal out next week, so it's an exciting time. But before I start, I was given some good words of wisdom for many of the participants yesterday that I should probably in preface discuss when I talk about my near-death experience, that this is not chronologically a 3-year-old talking. This is a soul talking, which there's a difference of soul age and chronological age from what I gained in my experience. When I'm here talking to you here today, it's almost the same as what I had within that experience. As I do believe souls, yes, they evolve and they grow, but that observer, hear me today is the same as what I experienced over 20 years ago. A little bit of background about myself. I saw, up front they had some Hebrew writing here and some Judaic phrases and stuff like that. And that is, my background. I come from a modern Orthodox Jewish family. And yesterday when I was presenting, someone reminded me that this week's Torah portion in Genesis talked about Jacob and Esau chasing him, and Jacob sleeping on the rocks and having the dreams of the angels going up and down, which I always thought to myself, why was my name Jacob? I know it was named after my grandparents, but why the biblical name of Jacob? And I found, as you're about to see, that Jacob, when he went to bed and went to sleep on the rocks and he had the dream of the angels going up and down, it was very similar. The angels going up and down the ladder, it was very allegorical and similar to what you're about to hear today in my own near-death experience, which later Jacob called the house of Beit El, or the house of God, or the house of the divine. And, my experience has some parallels with that name, so I do believe there certainly is a lot in a name if we look closely enough. But I don't want to belabor that point too much, and a lot of this is also going to be written in my upcoming book. My experience happened about 26 years ago. At the time, my folks didn't know, but I had whooping cough, which could be a fatal virus if left untreated. And I contracted it from a family friend, and And so at the time I had a bit of a cough, but my parents, both work in the helping industry. My father's a therapist. My mother worked as a prior nurse and an occupational therapist with earlier childhood intervention specialist. So to them it wasn't that concerning. But in the days prior to my experience, I had kind of an eerie feeling that something profound was about to shift and happen, but I couldn't quite know exactly what it was, what that was. But I knew something was about to happen in the prior coming days. Within my experience, ironically, it occurred during the time of Yom Kippur, a couple of days before, which is the Day of Atonement, in which those who follow the Jewish tradition prepare their souls to almost be judged and weighed, by God to live a year of health and happiness and prosperity, and try to kind of sleep your soul. It's kind of almost like that ancient Egyptian practice where you try to have your soul as light as a feather so that it could pass on to another dimension. I think that's the goal of the holidays, to let go and forgive yourself and others. And so for myself, I was about to enter the Lord and enter and experience the divine, but it was a different kind of twist than I guess you would expect, so to speak. It wasn't a God in man's image. It was all loving, all forgiving, all knowing God that was able to read my thoughts and my heart. And so, I went to a park at the age of 3 with family friends on a beautiful September day. And in the car, I began to notice that I was getting a little bit kind of wheezy, and my breathing was a little bit belabored, if you will. But still, at a young age, I ignored conventional wisdom because as a guy, most guys could attest to this, we have blinders on. The world could be imploding in front of us, but all we see is what we kind of think about. And that's kind of true. I was having that experience, and all I was thinking about was going to the park, despite something in me telling me that something was going to happen, and I should probably use my caution signals a little bit more than I did, but I digress. Anyway, and so in getting out of the car, and during the car ride, I was feeling, a bit of a wave of nausea, as well as this vortex-like sensation in the corner of my eye as the car was traveling. And but I knew exactly what that vortex was. It almost felt like something out of my hands that was almost, sucking in my soul, so to speak, and to go on to another plane and to leave this life behind. But I ignored that kind of Hoover vacuum cleaner's vortex that was awaiting me, and I just decided to, get out of the car, and I ran at some insane speed out of the car despite conventional wisdom telling me to go a little bit slower. And as I'm going onto the park, I go up a ladder, and so that was the reference with Jacob's ladder. And I kid you not, this all happened, and I got people to attest to it. And so I was going up the ladder to go up on a slide, and as I'm going up each rung of the ladder, again, my breathing becomes a lot more belabored and restricted as I'm traveling up each rung of Jacob's ladder. And eventually, when I go to the top, I notice that I have pure moment of suffocation, and I wasn't able to breathe, which to me was the scariest moment of my life, which came later on with the title and inspiration of my book, Life After Breath. But I was beginning to suffocate, which was very scary. And sometimes we take the breath for granted, but I learned from that moment that breath is that connecting point between heaven and earth. We inhale, we inspire in spirit, and exhale, experience those elevated states. And so I do believe that breath is indeed our connecting point to as above, so below. But when that breath was taken from me, that was when I was in a weird kind of incubatory state where I was just neither here nor there. I was somewhere in between. And then slowly, almost any kind of home, if you go into the basement of a home and go into a power breaker outlet, that was happening to me within my body, where every part of my body, due to the deprivation of oxygen, was beginning to shut down, one part at a time. And slowly, each and every part of my body was shut down, and I was then connected to looking in a disembodied state at my brain. And at the age of 3, in looking at my brain, I was able to understand from a higher vantage point every different component of my brain and all the different parts. And I kind of joke where at the age of 3, instead of going to Harvard, neurosurgery school or whatever, I kind of knew at that time a little bit more. And I think we fail sometimes because we try to understand the brain with itself. It would be like trying to take a hand and understanding itself. And sometimes to understand complexity, you need to use a little bit of your higher channeled vantage points. And that was happening to me at the age of 3, where up until that time I was taught to use the brain, but wasn't taught what it was in different parts of it. And there was no manual, which I try to provide in later meditation workshops that I do, which is ways to maximize the brain, and because that's a big component in our lives as a filter of consciousness. And looking down on the brain, slowly I began to notice that, again, much like other parts of my body, it was beginning to fail. And then slowly my brain just began to snap in half, and a large crack sound, almost kind of like a thunder strike on a tree kind of happened. The tree just literally just snapped in half, almost as if you take and I'm sorry, I'm seeing some reactions. Some people are empathic to it, and I apologize. But almost you take a plug in a room and just yank it as hard as you can. That was very forceful, and that would happen to me. And then, again, that vortex-like sensation came racing through me, and I was drawn to, a vista of darkness. And then eventually I was racing, at some insane speed, going higher and higher and higher and higher until there was no avail. You see, on the earth plane we have, I guess, biochemistry, which I guess minimalizes how good or how feel we can have. And so when you're purely in spirit, there's no limitation with how possibly you could feel or how high you could possibly soar. The only limiting factor is when you kind of put your hazards on and say, whoa, that was a bit enough. And that was what's happening to me, where there was no limitation with how euphoric or good I could feel. It was amazing. And then slowly I began to notice myself, as I was going and transitioning into the light, that I was drawn to the back right part of my brain, which I know people talk about as that part of creativity, or when we're able to really use some of those higher components of channeled information. And that's what I was experiencing, with the right side of my brain as I was racing at some insane speed to another dimensional plane and frequency. And as I was in my brain, I noticed to the right side was a beautiful palace that I connected to, and instantaneously I knew this palace as a palace of the light, and I recognized that some fellow NDEers of mine who have also seen the same palace too and connected to it, so there's some parallel experiences with what I had and what others. But this was what I kind of could best describe as, and I use this term just for practical understanding, as the palace of the light, or if you call it God, or whatever verbiage you have. It's, to me, it's limiting in a way, but it kind of helps to best understand it within this dimension. And from being in that palace of the light, I was able to connect with tons of angels that were surrounding it and basking in the glory of the light. And it was the most powerful light that I saw. And at the time, I had to shield myself from really looking at this light too much, because it was just too bright and too much for me to handle. And there was an incubational period, despite living 3 years, that I needed to have when I crossed over. And so it took me some time to get used to some of those higher spiritual octaves that I was experiencing. And then at that moment, I was beginning to go into a different field. It was almost kind of like a gold, bronze kind of flashing field, where I saw and I heard in front of me a lot of what I would refer to as awareness and presence of Christ. And growing up at a very early age, that was never something that was taught within my home. So it was something that I was experiencing that was outside of my upbringing. And so, when I was experiencing this, it was a familiar energy. It was a comforting feeling, and it was almost because I was almost upset that I forgot about this connection that I had with this Christ vibration that was surrounding me. And it really took away a lot of still emotions and fears that I was having from being in this dimension. And slowly I began to notice my body that was lying flat on the floor after it went down the slide, in which I encountered my two spiritual guides, a male and female entity, who were the most beautiful beings that I've ever seen. And again, their light was so bright, and the colors were just not of this dimension, that I do my best to kind of describe the aesthetics, but it's hard to put into words. In that moment, I knew instantaneously, my guides, who they were, and I saw that they were with me in many other carnations, and they were familiar. It's almost like you have a circle, and they're just a part of that circle. They are you, basically, the closest possible extension to yourself that you can have. And slowly I saw my body that was lying flat on the ground, and all the participants who were with me on that day, and I saw the concern and their anxiety that I was irresponsive to their calls that they were making at the park on that day. And when I saw them, when they were surrounding my body as it laid, flat, lined and not responsive, I saw that I was able to still see around their auric field or electromagnetic fields and what was around them. And so from using this kind of sight, I could see their own spiritual guides around them and angels that were by them, and their aura colors, and it was just fascinating because it was just such an adjustment from the physical reality that I was in, from 3 years. I lived on the planet at the time. And even, the most conventional guy who ended up saving my life was a, typical CPA accountant guy, not, kind of guy that you could picture with angels around him and, having like Tibetan guides by him and stuff like that. This is, it was just a regular, guy to go to a baseball game and have a beer or whatever. But it was a special man. He ended up saving my life. But I looked at his energy field and I saw how high vibratory and spiritual it was. And from that moment on, I learned a lesson that all is spiritual. Not all is necessarily aware of it, but we all indeed are all spiritual. Some people drink a little bit less from those waters of forgetfulness as they come to the planet, or have different shake-up experiences that cause a shake-up in consciousness and awareness of what we all are and are connected to. And in that moment, I was beginning to notice about hundreds of thousands of angels that were floating right in front of me. And these were kind of, I would best describe them almost kind of like cherubim, like angels. And I do believe artists who draw into, different churches are really using that right part of the brain and are connected to very accurately in their depiction, of these childlike angels. But they were right in front of me and almost kind of like a brown gold color. And it was like what was interesting was I was able to not think it but see it. It was all in front of me and it felt almost tangible. It was like physical. It was another dimension. And I was able to see, the angels, and I was able to hear their harmonic octaves, and I was able to feel quite comforting by them. And what I was able to see was also notice that they were sending energy to the planet and healing to myself. And I guess being the age of 3 and a young child, I guess maybe that's why those particular, subgroups of angels were present, with me at the time. But what I noticed that they were just looking straight ahead and weren't looking at me, but straight ahead. And then when I was looking at them, I almost had to pinch myself because I couldn't believe, right in front of me were this sea of angels, and it was just overwhelming. I thought I was hallucinating at the time, and still sometimes I do have that question, and people ask that question. I'm confident in the experience. I knew it was real and it was familiar, but there's still that skeptic part of myself that questions nearly everything, which I do believe is healthy. But from looking at all these angels and the sea of angels, I was beginning to notice my soul family was beginning to come forward during this time. Almost if you look in the distance, kind of like Field of Dreams, if you've seen the baseball movie where they're coming out of the back behind the field and stuff like that, and slowly they make their presence, and that's kind of what I saw. And instantaneously, I knew their souls and I knew them. But when I saw them, I felt quite ashamed and embarrassed, because I do feel, when you come to this earth plane, there's a planning process and a charting process. It's almost like if you're about to go to the military, and then a day later, everyone has this big festive parade for you and this party for you and all this stuff, and a day later you just come back and say, nah, I don't want to do that. And so I felt a little coward-like. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm not going to have another NDE, don't worry. And so I felt a little bit coward-like from seeing them, because I had all these dreams and promises and visions in that charting period with my soul family and spiritual guides. then I felt quite ashamed that I was about to, go back to them. And when I noticed their presence, and the angels were with me and spiritual guides, I was presented with kind of like a voiceless voice, if you will, this voice that was asking me, what will you do now, Jacob, if you will? What will you make of this? Will you continue to stay, with us, or will you go back to that life? And I had a lot of trepidation and anxiety for myself, leaving my parents behind, and for any, parent, that's the most nightmarish situation of losing a child, particularly at that age. And I just didn't want to do that to my parents. I didn't want to do that, but I had a decision and a choice to make, which not every end of year necessarily has. Sometimes that choice isn't as autonomous, where you said that you have to stay or go, but I was given that free rein answer. It was the most difficult question I've ever faced in my life, because I knew whatever answer, yes or no, that's where I would be. And so in that moment, there was, a little bit of, I'd say emotion and anxiety that I was experiencing, because, you do still feel stuff and think stuff on the other side. You don't go, but your awareness is a lot heightened. But that voice, that observer, still carries over. It's just a lot more liberated and aware, and it's not as boxed into the small confined body and dimension. And in that moment, I kind of had a little bit of my bargaining hat on, and let's make a deal hat on, and I said, well, if I do stay, what's going to happen? What will come of this lifetime? Kind of like, let's make a deal. So instead of answering yes or no, I kind of was bargaining a little bit. And, and in that moment, I was beginning to see, flashing images of a lot of moments of my life, and what I would view as a life review type. It's kind of like a Polaroid flashing image, sensation. We're able to see every moment of your lifetime through not only your eyes, but the eyes of another, and how you impacted the world around you. And then also I was able to see a couple different lifetimes that I lived, which is written a little bit more in detail in the upcoming book, Life After Breath. But also I was able to see what I would be doing, and I guess I would call it the future, but when you're on the other side, there is no time. It's just, there's no fragmented time. That's something that we construct as humans in the linear time that we create. But I was able to see, the life that I would live, and, the message that I would be able to bring forward. Within a winter, therein lies a summer, and my whole goal was to bring lightness into dark, that indeed we don't die, that we go on forever. And from the trauma that I experienced through suffocation and all that I had, that I indeed had a mission in life, that was a part of a group of people, who were with me, who was be able to be harbingers of this good news to wait to those who are ready and needing to hear it. It's nothing new, but all something that is deep within. And we've lived many lives and died many deaths, and we all know where we come from and where we're headed. But some people indeed, in heavy states of grief or feeling darkness or feeling lost, need to be reminded gently of that message. And so I recognized my purpose was just to be an alarm clock for those who might be a little bit asleep on the wheel, or not so much be awake. And the alarm clock wasn't mine. The message wasn't mine. The message was to be others. And so through skipping the rock in the river, banks, it would have a ripple effect, and then maybe someone else would pick up that rock and skip it to someone else who might need, that wave of love and that wave of light within moments of darkness. But from seeing that moment, I was able to understand, what my soul's agreement. And I spoke a little bit about this yesterday and touched upon the most relevant incarnation to this life that I had. And I saw that, my last life, I ended up, committing suicide in that lifetime. I took my own life. I had a little bit of a hubris lifetime where the what hit the fan, and it all just kind of went, black, and my back was against the wall, and I kind of freaked out, and, I took my own life. And years later, as a child, I would often have traumatic recall of that moment. But I, looking back, I recognized that, part of my I would use the word karma and dharma within this lifetime, was to be able to heal not only on the individual self, that when you're experiencing darkness, it's recognizing that, that's just an illusion, that all we are is indeed, love and light, and that's all we're connected to. And sometimes we lose sight, we lose memory of that, but we also don't embrace enough those dark moments of the soul, which are really pivotal moments of spiritual transformation. I know many of us can agree within those moments we were given an opportunity to rise from having everything that we know taken from us 12, again, beginning to recognize that we don't need anything. We're connected to so much more than the earthly pain, the earthly pleasures, and the earthly connections, that we are indeed spiritual beings in this earthly plane at this moment in time, and of our lives is just rather temporal. But I recognize that my mission in life is really to share with those who might be stuck and might be caught and might lose sight of their true awareness, and the ability, for time to unfold and for change. As you can never step in the same river twice. The river's always changing. The same thing with life. The rich of today could be the poor tomorrow, and vice versa. Change is always flowing, but we can't be able to experience those necessary changes for our soul's evolution if we're not, indeed continuing to stay on the field. We could still grow and evolve on either side, but it's different than being in this life of faith, which a lot of people have darkness in front of them, but are still persevering forward and entrusting the light, that they are and they're always connected to. And so, professionally, I know they mentioned that I was a social worker and a therapist, and that is something that I am really inspired by. Necessarily, I don't tell clients at all my story, but I embody that energy, and I never give up on someone who's ever stuck. And I always recognize that those moments are, when we look back at them, are some of our greater gifts when we're challenged, when we're able to find that polarity of pure light within its absence. As indeed, the book Return to Love by Marianne Williamson, as it says, fear is what we taught, love is what we are. And so for me, having this experience at such a young age was the ultimate education that I can have, as so many of us, the second that we come off the shores, are taught that we are separate than another, that we have to compete to get ahead, that we are a measurement of our temporary achievements and our grades, and we do well on our tests, that's our identity. But from having this near-death experience, I recognized that all of these realities were not of this planet. There was such a contrasting sensation that I had to recognize that we are all indeed pure love and pure. We are indeed pure loved, and we are loved so much more by those in the satellites in the heavens who are always with us and never leave us. We just at times lose awareness of them being around us. And so, that was something that I really learned, was the ultimate education from my near-death experience, which didn't come in a classroom, if you will, which really tried to, almost not intentionally, but it was an erosion of the spirit. It was an erosion of awareness. It was a part of myself which wanted to be, ingrained in this capitalistic Western civilization that I was a part of. And so, fortunately, later in life, after being kind of programmed, to survive, if you will, and being a part of the game, I was able to have a lot of pivotal teachers who allowed me to remember, re-remember and re-experiences these truths that were lying dormant. And I'm so thankful for all the near-death experience researchers and near-death experiencers who come before me, because I think the world is ready and open so much more to these experiences and want to hear different stories and want to hear different angles. And as we're doing this, I view any sharing as a collaborative process, and a lot of people will be able to share the experience, and it might cause some deja vu or some recall of, remembering that we have lived many lives before, and we don't indeed die, that we are eternal, spiritual, enchanted beings in this temporary world, and we're here to bring in that light to the darkness in front of us. And I do believe we all need to hear every story, because every story is unique, and there's no story that is superior or better than others. We could all learn from each and every individual story and trials and tribulation. And so, that was my life's purpose. After that was sharing the experience, but also being there for the ones who are forgotten, or for those who feel lost, and for those who feel just normal and regular and nothing special, is to just be a gentle reminder of indeed how unique and sacred we all truly are, and to kind of get rid of that amnesia that some of us have been fed the second we got here, and to be able to open up our eyes to the miracles that we are, and the miracles that we all indeed are a part of. It's just simply a shift of focus to recognize the God realization that is in front of us. But we have a funny way sometimes of not being aware of that. And sometimes it takes shake-up periods like a near-death experience or a form of spiritual transformative experiences to be a little bit uncomfortable and let go of that form of consciousness to come into a new. And so I am very thankful and very blessed for having this experience. And more importantly, I'm very thankful and very blessed for having a pivotal moment in time in which people are open to this, in which I'm not ostracized, in which I'm not hung as a witch in Salem or whatever. It's a beautiful moment in time where people want to hear more of this symphony. And as I do believe we all are, a part of this grand universe. And some people's, if you look at the word universe, you think of one, and verse, you think of sound. And I do believe so many of us have a pivotal addition to this cosmic symphony that we're all a part of. But sometimes that sound is not ours. It's inherited. It's been projected on us by how the world sees us. And I think if we're able to dig deeper, we're able to connect that deeper octave that indeed is a heavenly octave that is not a part of this realm. And so hopefully you guys will continue to dig deeper and find that deeper song. And this group is wonderful because you all are indeed embodiments of the heaven and earth that NDE ears try to create, which is just one human spirit, no separation, no monopolization in the eyes of God. Everyone is sacred and special and has a different addition to this unique pitch that we're trying to create together, that we can only do together. As world history has taught us, we need to do this together. When we're able to bring in that realization of oneness, the world will survive. And it doesn't just work for a select few. It needs to be a collective effort and overcoming the illusion of separation. And so with that thought, I do thank you for being receptive and open to this.
Questions and answers. But I have the first comment. Please describe in your experience how you saw people connected by the filaments of light.
Yeah, for those of you who were there with me yesterday, a lot of people ask, what were some of your experiences after? And, years later, out of the blue, I had what's called an out-of-body experience. And at the time, I didn't know what exactly it was, other than it was some cool, trippy stuff going on, and I didn't have Timothy Leary giving me anything. It was just, I just woke up, and just like that, I was out of my body. But again, almost 20 years later, I found myself on the Day of Atonement in Yom Kippur, which is normally a very heavy, almost somber, fear-based day. But I was able to experience the exact opposite, where I was able to, get out of my body and connect to my animal totem and stuff like that. But I was also able to see the strand of light that connected to each and every participant in the room. And I could also see the egocentric struggle that people have with having blinders on and forgetting, this strand of connection. And so earlier on, when I saw everyone holding hands, it was almost a parallel type experience of what I had that really, validated that string and that cord that connect us all. And I do believe we're here to remember that, because when we're able to do that, the world is a lighter, more compassionate, caring place where someone else's pain becomes your responsibility to feel that light in that darkness. Whatever capacity you can do it on a micro, macro perspective. We all indeed are responsible to be our brother's keeper. And I learned that in a playground where indeed we all are children just playing in God's playground. And we're here to play, we're here to have fun, but we all are children in the eyes of God. And that's where, allegorically, from Jacob's ladder to God's playground, there's a lot of symbology that I talk a little bit more about in my book. But hopefully that could be a gentle reminder that we're here to play, we're here to uplift, and we're here to be with all. And yes, yeah.
At what age were you able to articulate these memories, and who were you sharing them with?
Yeah.
When you first started that. That's remarkable that you remember that from
Yeah.
an early age.
I try to do my best to articulate. Some people will tell me I don't do that but every presentation that I have is an opportunity to explore different angles and be able to express it. Practically speaking, professionally, I started going public at the age of 26, within the same town that I had my experience. And so I never began to share this experience really up until my mentor that I shared the experience with, who was able to kind of kick my behind to get up on the stage and present. But before that, I was a very rather private guy, and there were subtle reminders that people had in my life that came to me intuitively that told of this purpose, of this mission. And this wasn't my mission. It wasn't something that I, held on to. It was a collective message that needed to get out.
Did you share with your parents when you came out? Did that?
No, I kind of kept it hidden. I was closeted for a long time because, in a way, to articulate that experience, it takes a long time. And I know I spoke a little bit about a pioneering near-death experience researcher by the name of, if you haven't heard of her, PMH Atwater. She's a real specialist in childhood and near-death experiences, and I had the true honor and privilege of meeting her in Philadelphia. But according to her and many other NDE researchers, they'll say there's about a 20 to 30 year period to process a childhood near-death experience, and I found that to be dead-on accurate. I mean, that was really what it took me. I didn't forget what happened, but to be able to put it and convey it in words, as frustrating, as limiting as it was, I was able to recognize that it wasn't about myself, that indeed people needed to hear this, that it wasn't meant to be held on to. And sometimes the universe won't almost allow you to hold on a message if it's meant to be heard. They'll have a funny way of just getting you out there. Even if you kick and scream like I did. Kind of almost like if you see the Hereafter movie with Matt Damon, how he was neglectful of giving readings and stuff like that, but almost kind of like, when you have a gift to share, it's not yours, and the universe wants you really out there. And so that's really what I was. I would more comfortably be on the sports field and in my own apartment, but there was another part of me that wanted to share too, and so it's a little bit of a contradiction with wanting to just be by myself versus sharing this. And so I struggle with that. And even till this day, I'm a very private person, so to get public is challenging, but I make it about others. Do we have any time for any more questions? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Were you, even internally, were you different from the rest once you had the experience? In some say, internally or externally, were you people knew that you were different?
Was there a change to me in the experience before and after, is what you're saying?
Because it was like a year old you were, and then the 3 to 26, for example, you said.
Yeah.
23 years, were you the same child like anybody else, or internally you were different?
Yeah.
Externally you were different?
I like to think that I'm normal, but that's not my say. I mean, you have to ask those around me. I think everyone thinks they're normal in their eyes. But I talk a little bit about this in my book. There was a lot of, stuff happening after that experience. Obviously, having a little bit of the TBI that I had when my brain shut down, that filter of consciousness within my brain shifted. So there was almost like this pillar of light that I was connected to for a couple of years after that experience. And so after that experience, I was kind of like a George Anderson or a medium in a way, where I was able to pick up on interdimensional communication from spiritual totems to deceased loved ones to angelic encounters after. And I thought it was quite normal until I turned to a classmate in preschool and I said, "Do you see that animal around this person?" They kind of looked at me like, "You're around some weird what kid." I'm like, "All right, okay." And then after I recognized that not everyone was able to see what I saw, even kids. I know kids are quite sensitive and open, but later on in life, we kind of lose that, and we are on this kind of mechanism and apparatus of just, being programmed to this world that we're conditioned to and a part of. But later on in life, I began to redevelop some of those deeper intuitive capabilities, and there was a transformation that happened to me, kind of a little bit after my high school years. And so, growing up, I had a lot of premonitions where events to come, and I would be able to see a lot of different moments in my life that I knew to happen. And a lot of NDEers will share this too, when you have those future, premonitions that you have in your NDE, which aren't future. It's all unfolding, one time. It becomes a little bit scary when it actually does happen in front of you. But, so But I consider myself a regular guy, and nothing unique. We've all have a connection to the other side. We all are a part of the other side. We all are going there, but we just have to take off those barriers of separation that we all inherited. So yeah, and so with that, I do thank you all for listening, because if this wasn't possible, I would just hold on to this trauma and live with it and not be able to process it. But we live in a world today where, not only am I able to have free therapy by processing this with you, but hopefully you too will be able to have a therapeutic experience and feel a little bit lighter and be able to hold a different angle to the other side. And it's my hope that some of this, I know there's many different paths up to the mountain, but a similar light, and the same applies with sharing some near-death experiences, but hopefully some of this will strike some chords in you that indeed we are all internal beings. We're all here together. We are here to just gently remind each other, of our true state in a world that at times just forgets. And so I do thank you for being here, and hopefully you could share this to those that are ready indeed to hear it. And if you do have, want to hear a little bit more about my NDE or about any other programs that I do provide, I know there are cards in the back. And hopefully maybe afterwards we could have some questions and answers that I could have, to really answer anything that you have on your heart or chest. So I do thank you for being here, and hopefully this was a bit of warmth and a bit of light within the months of the winter time, that indeed we're all a part of this forever summer, and that's we're always connected to, and there is indeed no darkness. It's just an illusion and a trick of the mind. So thank you. It was just my pleasure.